Job aids are meant to give you exactly what you need to get the job done. When they're designed right, they make it easier and quicker for you to perform a task, but when they're designed wrong, they can actually cause more harm than good. Today, we'll explore job aids, what they are, and how to design them to actually improve performance rather than hinder it. Hi, I'm Kristen. As an ID, I love job aids because I use them all the time. I use a GPS map to help me get to where I need to go as quickly as possible. And I use this specific recipe to make the perfect lemon cheesecake cookies every time. For freelance work, I use a time conversion chart to help me calculate my hours quickly and accurately. These are all examples of well designed job aids in my everyday life that help me get tasks done more effectively. But not all job aids are effective. I've also come across some super confusing IKEA instructions that left me with nothing but a crooked dresser and wasted time. Using job aids regularly helps me design them more effectively. And the power really lies in knowing what makes a good job aid and keeping that user in mind. So today I'm going to show you how to do just that. Let's start by talking about what a job aid actually is. So a job aid is a tool that's designed to assist somebody in performing tasks. So it's something that somebody usually has nearby while they're completing a task. It usually includes any relevant information or processes that somebody would need to perform the task correctly. And in addition to that, information in a job aid usually does not need to be memorized. That's why it's in a job aid. It's meant to be referenced. It's not meant to be information that you have to have at the top of your mind all the time. Finally, job aids are usually located nearby for easy reference during a task. So whether it's on somebody's desk or taped to a wall nearby or bookmarked on their computer, the idea is that they can find it really quickly when they need it to perform their task correctly. So now we know what a job aid is, but what's important when designing job aids? Well, there's a lot of things that are important, but probably the most important thing is that if you're designing a job aid, you want to make sure that it solves a problem. So job aid should address a real need or a problem. If it doesn't, there likely isn't a reason or a purpose for your job aid. So make sure before creating one, you can at least identify the need or problem that you're going to address. And that's really because job aids are most useful when they solve a real issue. Again, if there's not really a reason for your job aid, then you might not need to create a job aid. There might be something else that you need to do here. So really keep that problem solving aspect at the forefront of your mind when dissolving job aids. And now that we know the basics of job aids, what really is a job aid? I mean, we know the definition, but what do job aids look like? And there's a lot of answers to that. Job aids can look really different because the idea behind a job aid is that it helps you get your job done. It gives you information to get your job done. So there's a lot of differences in terms of like what they can look like. So let's talk about types. We're going to start with an easy one that you've probably seen many times before, and that's a checklist. So a checklist is usually a list, or always a list of items that you want to complete. So here's an example of a checklist. This is for volunteers, beach cleanup volunteers. So you have your list here. They need to get supplies, pick up trash, and sort and dispose their trash. This helps them get the job done. They don't need to memorize any of the steps, and it makes them really easy to check off. Now, another type of job aid is a data array, and this is a body of required data. Now, I use this all the time when I was a teacher because I was always having to call other teachers. We would have this phone list of extensions and I would call the teacher I needed. Now, I don't think I ever memorized their extension numbers, and that's because this job aid was amazing. And that's what I have for you as an extension here. So as you can see, there's the different departments that you need to call, as well as the different phone numbers for the extensions. And this is a really good job aid. It's really effective, and you've probably used something similar to it. So the next job aid that we're going to talk about is one of my favorites, and that is a flowchart. That's because if designed well, it's super easy to follow and structured really well in a way that is organized and concise and oftentimes really nice to look at. So here's an example of one here for a dog groomer. So here, if you start where it says start, you'll check the pet's behavior. And if the pet is aggressive, then you'll use a muzzle and proceed with grooming. And if the pet is not aggressive, then you'll just proceed with grooming. And so obviously this is a really simple version of a flowchart. They're usually much longer, but they show you generally how to follow a series of actions or how to follow a specific process in a really clear and structured way. Our next type of job aid is A script. And you've probably used a script before for many different reasons. Now, scripts generally can be popular for things like call centers, or like if you're doing cold calls trying to close a deal, things like that. Usually scripts are necessary there. And so here's a script. It's an example of customer dissatisfaction script. If a customer shares dissatisfaction, basically how should the person respond? So basically, I'm sorry you're not satisfied, using the customer's name and asking them to give more details. Now, this is a very simple version of a script. Usually they're a little bit more detailed, but this is a simple example of what a script would look like and how it technically counts as a job aid if it's used for this reason. Our next example is steps. Really easy. You've probably used a step up job aid many times throughout your life, and it's just an ordered sequence of actions. And so here's an example of a shift change steps. So you'll start with briefing the incoming shift, followed by completing the shift log, and finally signing off. So really easy example here of just what steps look like. The most important part is that obviously they're in order, whereas a checklist might not necessarily be in order. Now that we've talked about what a job aid is and you've seen a bunch of different types of job aids, you know that there are a lot of different things that can count as a job aid. So let's talk about what a job aid isn't. A job aid isn't a replacement for instruction. And while many times you'll see a job aid used as kind of a band-aid for a knowledge or skill gap, if there's a true knowledge or skill gap, oftentimes a job aid that's meant to just be referenced on the job isn't going to solve that true problem there. Sometimes a job aid can be nice in terms of complementing a training and the training showing you how to use that job aid on the job, but a job aid itself isn't going to solve that problem by itself. In addition to that, a job aid is not a tool like a laptop or a spatula or a clipboard or a pencil. All of these are tools that you might use on the job, but they're different in that these are all tools that you need on the job. But a job aid is different in that it provides the information that you need to get the job done. And so while you might need a spatula to cook pancakes, the job aid would be the pancake recipe, really showing you how to use it. And that spatula is just an additional tool. So now that you know what a job aid is and a job aid isn't, let's get into a scenario. So we're going to build a job aid for call center agents. And the problem that is leading to this job aid is that the remote call center agents struggle with remembering which team to transfer specific requests to. So they're having trouble. They don't know who to escalate to. And in addition to that, they are remote employees. So we want to keep that in mind. We want to make sure that this is accessible in a remote environment. So before we get into that, let's talk about some different tips that we'll need to think about when designing this job aid. And the first is to know your audience. So you really want to think about when and where the audience will use this job aid. Again, they're remote employees. We know that they'll need to use it when handling returns. So that's really important information. In addition to that, we want to ask ourselves questions like, what skills and habits do they have? Do these call center agents have? What's their working environment like? When are they going to need to access this? How often do they take return calls? And then where does this support reside? Where is it going to be? Is it going to be on their desk? If they're remote employees, do we know that they even really have a desk? Maybe they're not necessarily working from the specific place every time. And so we might want to make it on their computer where they can bookmark it for easy access. And in addition to that, really similar here, how will they access it? So you really, really want to keep that at the forefront of your mind. How are they going to get this? When are they going to need to get this? If we put it in an LMS system or something like that, then they're going to have to log on to the LMS and use it every time and do all of their login credentials, and it's likely going to distract from where they need it. So they need it accessible and quick. So we want to keep all of these things in mind as we're designing. But something else to really keep in mind is that we want to be clear and concise as possible. I always think about recipes. And so when I'm making a recipe, one of my biggest pet peeves is when you're just trying to get to the recipe and there's this really long story and you can't get to the recipe and there's so many ads and you just need that recipe, but you can't get to it because there's so much going on. And I always keep that in mind when designing job aids. I'm usually never designing a recipe job aid, but keeping that frustration in mind that I experience when not getting what I need in a job aid is something I think about when I'm designing for others. And so that's what you want to do too. Be clear and concise, include only the information that's necessary to complete the task, and really only that information. You might really have to think about it multiple times, and you might think something is important, but it may not be. So really think and try to cut out any unnecessary information. In addition to that, exclude anything like history, facts, extra details that might be nice to know, but again, are just going to distract from getting to complete your task. Think about it again like a recipe. Although a fun fact about a recipe might be nice, do I need it to make the recipe? No. So exclude it. And that's really, really important. So let's look at a bad example of this. I want you to look at this example here. Now, this is a job aid, and there's some irrelevant information here. Maybe some information that might seem nice to know, but could take away from getting the job done. So look at this, pause it if you need to, but really think about what doesn't belong here. And you can go ahead and press play when you're ready. Let's talk about it. So there's a lot of unnecessary information here. Yes, there's an explanation of what the returns process is, what this job aid is. And there's an explanation below of the review team and the policy team. All nice to know, but it's a lot of information. Do they need this information to get the job done? No. And there's also some errors here, like the review team is capitalized when the policy team isn't. And that might lead the learner to think, well, why is that capitalized? Why isn't it? It might lead to more distraction than it is helping. And so what you want to do is just take that information away. As you can see here, this is the same exact job aid, but without all of the unnecessary information that might have seemed necessary, but really wasn't. So keep that in mind when you're designing. Remove anything that really doesn't matter. And in addition to that, you want to make sure that you're always thinking about visual design. Always, really with anything you develop. But job aids are so important because usually they're a page and someone's looking at them. And if there's any alignment or anything off, it can be distracting. So make sure to follow visual design principles. We have a video on it on this channel, so be sure to check that out if you're interested. But let's see what this looks like here. Let's look at a bad example. I want you to look here. What's wrong with this? It's the same one as earlier, but there's some things that are off with visual design. Look at it and think about what could distract the user from actually using this to get the job done here. Pause it if you need to and press play when you're ready. Now, there are a couple of things that are wrong with this. The first one is alignment. So if we drew a line all the way through, you can see that a lot of these boxes aren't aligned and it looks really confusing. Like things aren't lined up with the lines, it's off. The user might be thinking, what's the reason for this? Why does this look like that? And it might take away from them actually understanding and using the job aid. And in addition to this, contrast is a huge problem here. And so as you can see, the text is a dark blue, and then the decision tree behind it is blue as well. And it's really hard to see. The contrast is actually 198:1, which is not a good contrast. So a lot of people won't be able to see this, which would be a problem. So now let's see what this job aid looks like if we take all of these errors away. Here we go. So job aid is easy to read. There's no visual design principles that are going to distract from using this. And our call center agents can use this quickly, effectively. We'll make sure that we include it as a bookmark so they can reference it when handling returns, and we are good to go. So keep these things in mind when you're designing job aids. As we wrap up, think about how you can put this knowledge into practice. Really reflect on the types of job aids that you might use in your everyday life, like a recipe or a checklist, and think, what makes this so helpful? Now, keep that idea and use it as you design your job aids. If you are making a job aid, make sure that it solves a real problem. And remember that job aids should make tasks easier to perform, not distract from it. So keep the audience's needs at the forefront of your design the entire time. And if you're new to instructional design, be sure to check out the Become an ID checklist linked below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.